The following podcast is a Vasilis Scarlias production.
Hello everyone, I'm Saloni.
And I am Vasilis.
We run Changemakers, a student-run initiative that aims to empower, educate, and connect Gen Zers interested in entrepreneurship.
We interview teenagers with impactful projects and create resources to help you change the world. If they can do it, so can you.
On this podcast, we discuss the logistics of creating different types of projects with Gen Zers who have already done it. We will leave our social media and website information in the description. Hello everyone, we are here today with the Bykov brothers, Asher and Joey, the founders of the Debate Without Debate podcast. The podcast goal is to create depolarization through conversation and educate Gen Z about a variety of issues. They have interviewed great names like Gary Vee, Max Ressinger, and Nupal Kiaslow. The podcast is amazing. I feel enlightened every time I listen to it. So we are so excited to use insights from this conversation to improve our very own podcast. Welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Wow, what a nice intro. You did such a succinct job of encapsulating what we've tried to start. So I appreciate the introduction.
I feel famous now.
Well, we're
Yeah,
very
it's
excited to
amazing.
be here after the interview we did with y'all on your site. And really excited that you started a podcast because it's a great way to just integrate everything that you've started already on the blog.
Yeah, that leads me straight to my next question. So tell us a little bit more about your journey with podcasting. Like, how did it all begin?
All right, I guess I'll start off on this sort of question. The path to becoming a podcaster was not really directed in a sense. My brother and I we both had, we were very active in our speech and debate club in high school, and we found that community didn't breed the types of conversations which we wanted to have, breaking past the sanctioned affirmative or negative to have real conversations, breaking past, what the system provided to us. We wanted to get to the core of issues and actually find a solution in the real world as opposed to finding a solution in a classroom or in a debate setting. And we found that maybe publicizing our message on the internet would be a good way of interacting with the community and building a community of like-minded people. And so at first we were thinking, let's start a YouTube. And then I'm like, oh no, that's a bit ubiquitous. Everybody has a YouTube channel, and we have a YouTube channel as well, but that's not our main claim to fame, so to say. And we kind of stumbled upon podcasting as a way to get other people involved in a conversation, because that's really the core of what podcasting is for us, is publicizing conversations. No script, no true narrative, just giving raw, true responses and interactions to the public so that they can feel involved and maybe gain some insight from what we're talking about. So it took a long way to get to podcasting. It was kind of like how do I even put it?
It wasn't, we kind of fell into it pretty much.
Exactly. That's
But the color I'll add in here is when we would travel to competitions as debaters in high school, we had a really lucky opportunity to do national competitions. And what that provided with us is we got to interact with people of a variety of different backgrounds, aside from just our local community or our county where we would debate locally. And what that provided is just this bigger vision of what we noticed as a microcosm in the activity that we had loved that started to corrode it was happening not just in the activity, but it was just a microcosm for what was happening around the world. On our news, you see division. In our politics, you see division. In our culture, you see division. So if the problem ends up becoming division is the thing that is basically killing these productive dialogues, despite, differing ideas, our goal is never to enforce our opinion on other people. Like, our job is not to be a propaganda force. If anything, we're just trying to push a message that we should empathize with people across boundaries, that we should have conversations despite differences. And that's where we came around to the idea of depolarization through conversation, which is just it's just a holistic understanding that the way we get beyond where we are right now to where we want to be, where we're less polarized, is through those conversations.
And it's also worth noting that although you guys may have a question like this later on, I'm kind of jumping the gun, but We started it off as sort of a podcast, but our intentions are greater. We want to consider ourselves as a media company, a media
Yeah.
startup, though we do not want to be like a typical media source or like one of the papers where the viewer or listener needs to discern what's right and wrong all the time. We say screw that, and instead we say let's introspect, let's analyze, as opposed to let's determine what's real or fake.
Hmm.
Yeah, I love that. And that's really interesting because I actually ended up quitting speech and debate for the exact same reasons you kind of saw like those flaws in. So that's, yeah.
And also, we were thinking to transform Changemakers into a media organization,
Hmm.
but we wanted to be a little more interested to find out other ways to promote content, to find new resources. And yeah, so this is how our website created, the podcast was created, and also other different services are coming out in the next months, like a page where we can have only promotions about products or reviews that they don't have to do only with entrepreneurship, but it's a more general page and more open to the general public view.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think what you're saying here is so spot on in the way you're transitioning as well. Because when Joey and I have had conversations over the last few months, we've taken a little bit of a hiatus from doing interviews and took a real step back. Most of this coincided with the fact that Joey's applying to schools. So he had to deal a lot with that. So took a little break, but we were able to really reflect on like how much more could this be, right? And taking that one step back and amidst all the craziness that's going on and really reflecting on that fact has made us realize that it's not just a show, right? It can be making exclusive videos for YouTube or Instagram or TikTok, whatever it may be on the media front, but it goes far beyond that, right? Like there's policy implications to what we're talking about, there's business implications to what we're talking about. It's part of the reason why we have the guests on our show, and I'm sure that's the same reason why you have the type of guests on your show. Is these are the people that we think are the forces that we should be watching out for that will change the way that we operate. And we want to be a part of that. Like we fundamentally want to be a part of the change that will be the bridge between the division now to hopefully less division later.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. This is exactly what we were thinking when we sit down and we were thinking, what about our upcoming episodes? Who we could interview and about what? And
Hmm.
instead of doing only interviews, we wanted a more deeper discussion. And your example with your podcast, which was a great inspiration for us, I think that it was the greatest choice. So
Appreciate
let me ask you something. Do you think that quality or quantity is more important in the podcasting game?
it. This is a question that we go back and forth on all the time.
You want me to hop in?
I'm gonna jump in on it
Okay.
first, and then I want you to add some, Joe.
All right, yeah, sure.
This is where I come in on the issue. There's a very famous podcaster named Ira Glass. He created This American Life. He's a massive inspiration to me and has been a massive inspiration for a lot of journalists. The way he comes at this issue is the same way that I do. Quality will be bred by quantity. If you put in the work, in my personal perspective, and every single week, like This American Life does, like a lot of other podcasts, like NPR does, whatever you can really look at in terms of established media, what they are able to do is on a weekly basis, twice a week, three times a week at times, they're creating incredible documentaries. The only way that they get there, though, is by getting past the 100 episode mark, right? Like, if you think about the podcast that you listen to right now, they're probably not in the early days, right? And I'm sure that's probably the same case with what you're starting right now. When you start off, there's not a ton of people, but if you can find that core audience, it'll grow. Nevertheless, how do you get to that growth point? We're not there yet, quite obviously, right? We need to take it to such a more broad spectrum in terms of appeal. But the only way that we've realized how to do that is we take just a sunk cost approach to the way that we look at our podcast. Let's get to 100 and then talk, right? Let's get the initial reps in. We've done 55 reps at this point. We have 55 episodes
yeah.
released. we're still trash. We're not like as bad as we were before, but we're still, compared to where we want to be, trash. And I think that's important for all of us to realize. It's not a bad thing to be bad in the beginning. And I think there's a lot of problems with people who they're afraid of being bad in the beginning. And we're not like that bad. I know I say trash, but
I don't think we're
that's for
trash.
dramatic
We're
effect,
not we're
right?
not we're not nearly at the place where we want to
Yeah.
be at, and we're content with that, but we're still striving for more. I think that, you know, I was watching a YouTuber by the name of, I think his name was Ryan NG or something
Hmm.
like that. And within the span of 3 days, I saw him go from 1,000 subscribers to 55,000 subscribers, while like barely has any videos on his channel, but they were just such good quality pieces of content, and that's what drove the algorithm forward for him and got him those extra thousands of followers. And I don't think that, especially in terms of like making content or making things that are intriguing, it's important to note the goal shouldn't be how much content can I push out.
Hmm.
Because if your goals are on numerics, if you're saying how can I get 1,000 more people to listen to my episode, you will never get 1,000 people. It'll seem almost ingenuine. You'll have no real truth to your narrative because people can see through it. That's why I think uh, the beauty of new creators is that it's it's almost like play. It's for fun. It's almost like kids going on a playground. You want to do it because you want to do it, and I think that's what has the most holistic, true, manageable, and like something which you can actually preserve for a long time. That sort of growth, you can't beat that by a board of executives saying, "How can we get 5 more episodes out this week?" That's just,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to listen to that episode. I don't want to listen to that podcast. You know what I mean? But to some extent, you do need to put in the reps. So like that basic rule, like the 10,000 hour rule or something like that, you
Hmm.
need to experiment. You need to be bad for a significant portion of time until you're good, and you can't skip the steps.
That approach, I think, also leads us to a point where if you really want to tackle something like a podcast, and this is a recommendation that I give to most people when when they ask whether or not they should, I talk to them and ask them like, do you want to be doing this for like 10 years basically? And I don't literally mean 10 years, but I mean, are you willing to do it for more than 1 year, more than 2 years? Because when you start off, you're just not going to be good. And like that's totally okay. There are plenty of people who started off terrible. Example, Joe Rogan, one of our personal inspirations for starting a podcast. Don't agree with him on everything, but he leads the way in terms of the type of style that we do, conversational, interview based. His first episodes, if you go back and watch it, are literally shot on a potato. He has no mics. They are terrible audio quality. He has no conversational ability. And he's just like high or drunk the entire time. And he talks about it openly. He's like, they were bad. How many episodes is he at right now? Nearly like 1,400 plus, right? We're at 55. We're nowhere there yet. And we know that. And that's why I said, we're still trash in comparison. I don't literally mean we're trash. If you'll take a listen to any of the stuff that we've created, I think it's decent. It's pretty good. But there's still a long way to go. And that approach is most important when thinking about quality versus quantity.
Yeah, it's like that meme. I'm not trash, but I'm golden trash. But I don't
Word.
think you guys are trash. You guys are amazing.
I
So,
appreciate it.
yeah,
Likewise.
how would you put out that much content without feeling burnt out? Have you guys ever felt burnout?
Hell yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Like
definitely.
all the time.
I mean, burnout is like, again, like you have to go through the failures to figure out where you can succeed. Like you're gonna go through a period of time, and I think this happened for us, and we're gonna experience this in the future as well, where we get so fixated on this idea, this project, this piece of whatever we're doing. Maybe it'll be for the podcast or for some other endeavor in life, but it's like you get so fixated on it, and you're so fixed into your patterns that you don't find ways for to optimize it.
Mm.
And that's what I found for us. Like editing through episodes is a labor intensive process. Recording, creating, like we're a two-man show, like we're a two-man band. And so sometimes it wears on you a little bit. We took again like a few months off um because of my college admissions process and stuff like that, and there's a lot of things happening in our own personal lives, which kind of made it more difficult to record. But during that time where we took a bit of hiatus, we figured out ways to optimize our setup, optimize the way in which our workflow works, optimize the way in which we think, so that we don't experience burnout in the future. So you have to almost walk into it raw, experience the times where you screw up, where you're burnt out, where you're like, damn, I'm so tired and I got 5 essays to write tonight.
Yeah.
You got to go through that in order to actually say, okay, well, what can I do differently? There's no way to walk in and do it perfect. I think that's the general theme
Yeah,
of all of
I
this.
agree. And one thing I'll add to that for anyone who may be experiencing burnout or when they do experience burnout and they're listening to this, the steps that Joey and I have now approached to the way we do things is we just try and celebrate small wins. Like, if we get a big guest on and we're really excited about it and we did great in the interview, or even if we did poorly in the interview, but we got the guest, we just try to celebrate that. We try and get excited about that. And that keeps you re-engaged in the whole process. Podcasting, creating online is a fun process. It should be fun. It should not feel like remarkably labor intensive.
It shouldn't feel like your schoolwork. It shouldn't
Mm.
feel like homework.
Right.
If it is, then drop it. Like in all honesty, or reanalyze to make it more fun. But it should never be like, oh my god, I have to record this other episode. I freaking hate my life. Never, never should be like.
But again, back to that like sunk cost approach, you're going to have to put in those initial reps before you really realize how to optimize, right? Like if you're starting off and you're like, damn, this feels like homework, it is homework. Like you have to learn the technology. You have to learn what software to use. You have to learn how to interview. You have to practice, right? Like Joey and I will practice together, figure out the questions, do the appropriate research. Like that is homework. It's not that you shouldn't treat it like homework in the beginning, but if down the line you're like, hey, this still feels like homework and I've done it for 100 episodes, then it's like, you know what? Maybe you should try and do something a little bit different, or maybe honestly take a hard look and ask yourself, do I actually really want to continue? There's no problem with stopping something that doesn't feel like it's working.
There's multiple ways to get the same global impact. It could be through podcasting, YouTube, writing books, blog posts,
Or
and
starting a business.
yeah, just doing something. I
Yep.
mean, yeah, there's multiple ways to do it.
As for me, I agree with you. And I think that the worst experience that we had was to edit our own voices while we were creating our very first episode.
Yes.
It was emotionally exhausting to do that, but I, we can learn. We learn through this. We become better, and I think that this is the natural process. You said that you've been you had a bit of hiatus from recording episodes. Why is this is the case?
I mean, I think we're semi fortunate to not really have like a crazy amount of haters. And I think that sort of boils down to the fact that depolarization is what both sides strive to do. Whether you're
Ideally.
ideally like people on the political left want to be able to sit at a table and like figure things out. And I think people on the right too, to some extent, also want to do that. It's a joint sort of moral objective. Um, and I think sure there's like 10% or 5% of people who don't agree with our narrative. But a lot of times, like I feel like the hate is just people who are just trying to troll. Like they're not really there to be honest. They're just there to get, I don't know, an extra like or an extra comment. Doesn't really get to us because luckily the positive, knowing that we're doing something positive for the world and that we're getting people from Singapore, Thailand, the United States, Australia saying, "Hey, I listened to your episode and it really made me think in a different way."
That
That
outshines.
that beats the guy who's in
Yep.
our YouTube comments like, "Yo, why your hair look like that? You're trash." Like, you know what I mean? That stuff just it doesn't that's superficial. The fact that I was able to impact one person or two people in maybe a completely different part of the world because of a recording which we uploaded with Cal Newport or Nupal Kiazolu, that's cool to me.
Yeah. It's and that's also how we approached when we first started off. We started recording with literally our iPhones using the voice memos app, which we then realized was not the best way to really record. But we still published that. Like that still went out on the internet. And we said, if even if just our grandmother or our mother is listening, that's still one person. And I think when it comes to creating online, the online has given us the ability to scale conversations that might happen between two individuals. Like for example, we're talking with you two currently. That's two people that we get to distill our message to and our information to. But this episode then goes out to call it 100 people, 1,000 people. That's scale. Like, even if it's only 100 or 1,000, that's still more than the 2 people, 4 people that we have in this room right now. So it almost gives us a stage to speak on, even if it is small. Like, think about how many people would die for the opportunity to have 1,000 people in an auditorium listening to them as they speak passionately about a subject. Those people aren't here right now, but they're here in spirit, and we have the intention of making sure that those people go and see it. And then the only other thing I'll add here in terms of the conversation about haters, since we're still in that beginning phase, we're still trying to grow to a point of scale where we have mass, like a mass distribution, mass audience sort of level. When you start off, what I've realized is that for the most part, the people who are listening or watching really like your stuff. Like, if they really don't like it, they're not gonna tune in because you're still small. And so the people who keep coming back, those are your 100, 1,000, 2,000 true fans, to take from Kevin Kelly, and his 1,000 true fans kind of argument of building a business. So when you're starting off, you're not ideally going to face that much criticism unless you're doing something super outlandish. In our case, we're not doing something super outlandish. And so, with that in mind, we've received a ton of positive feedback. As a matter of fact, the first episode we ever released, which was with one of our dear friends, my best friend's kid named Amon. That episode not only is still one of our best performing, but we received email after email, Facebook message, Instagram message. That was our first time we published anything. And those people, we knew some of them. Some people we didn't know. We were doing some guerrilla marketing, putting it in Facebook groups, et cetera, et cetera. But people were reaching out. No, not a single person reached out and said, "Hey, this is garbage." Even though, like, we've gotten better since then, and we look back on it and we're like, "Wow, we could have done so much better." And in our heads, we were hella critical of ourselves. We were like, "Wow, like, this wasn't as great as I thought." Like, we've had better conversations before, but to other people, the perception is entirely different. It goes back to the same perception that I have of the content I create right now. It can be very vastly even different from how other people approach it. And for the most part, people are lovers. People want to see good stuff in the world.
Yeah, and
Definitely.
definitely, like, the impact definitely overpowers any of the negativity. So, how do you feel about podcast advertisements? Do you think that takes away, like, the authenticity of your content?
It depends on what stage you're at. If you're like on your first episode and you're talking about sports and then your advertisement's like, buy this shampoo. I'm like, that's really out of pocket.
Yeah, word.
Why would you want to do that? Like if you're gonna make advertisements, and this is what Asher and I have been speaking about a lot in our free time or just during business meetings and stuff like that. Like who are the brands which we would want to represent our image on our podcast? What are brands which we would want to advertise us? Our ideal advertisement, our ideal, market. And we've kind of came to the consensus we're not going to be doing advertisements with shampoo companies or body wash or stuff like that, or like just things which don't really feed into the narrative of depolarization. Um, I think that advertisements have its purpose because again, like you got to put food on the table to some extent. Like, how can you supply an initiative without money? That's kind of like a driving force. You need that sort of stuff. Um, but I would say the longer that you can hold out, you should.
Yeah, especially if you haven't garnered your, 1,000 true fans and you haven't gotten to a point where people have the economic capacity to purchase stuff, right? Like,
Yep.
as much as an ad will work, it's probably not as strong. And in my case, I think it dissuades the listener in the beginning to have advertisements unless it's like unless you're already an established individual, right? Like if you're an influencer or you're an author and you're an established individual or a professor and you start a podcast and you're advertising from the jump, you're probably going to be chill cuz like that's the intention setting out. They started off as a business. We started off as a hobby. If anyone else starting this out as a hobby wants to transition to a business, build the audience first, then go to a position where you can start thinking about advertising because you don't want your listeners to be like, why the hell are they like, advertising about Bitcoin or like gold or, like weird things that sometimes you'll get weird hacky individuals sending you emails about and you'll get maybe $5 from. Um, that's not the best way to go about it. And you want to make sure, ideally, in advertising that there is that match.
I think you also have to think about what the viewer or listener is thinking about. When I'm watching a YouTube video or listening to a podcast and they have an ad, like I'm sorry, but like 95% of people are not gonna sit through that ad.
Mhm.
I'm not. I'll matter of fact, I'll probably click off the video if the ad is longer than a minute because I'll just be pissed. So you got to think about that. Like think like this is what Asher told me when I was taking tests in school. A lot of times, like think like the test maker, not the test taker. Think like no, think like the test
Maker.
taker.
No, test
Yeah,
maker.
but if you
You got it right the first time.
if you reverse that, if you think like the test taker, if you're the creator of the test, and if you start thinking about the test taker, you'll be able to create better questions. You'll be able to create things which are more enticing for the person who's actually interacting with your product. Now
Yep.
that's a bit confusing, but don't if you think it's going to bore you, don't make other people be bored by it.
Mm.
Yeah, we currently do the Anchor FM advertisements because we have a lot of website domain costs and things to cover. So we also agree with your point of view as well. So we're going to have a little break and we will come back to you shortly. So, do you guys have any other projects that you are currently working on?
Ooh, what a great question. Um, I think the answer to that is yes. Not all of them are really like set in stone. Like
Not a lot of them we can also we don't we can't like we haven't fleshed out
yeah,
100% of them. There's a lot of things in the works that are almost like auxiliary to the podcast and building it out as a media company. But I think that we're gonna keep a lot of that in store. You know what I mean?
I will say on a personal level, Joey and I have both been undertaking just more creative ventures for myself. This entire year, I'm trying to do one new creative task for each month. So this month, I've been writing for an hour every day on Medium, which you can go check that out if you'd like at Asher Bykov on Medium, which is just my name, which has been really just a good thing to do because I'm flexing a different muscle in my brain, trying something out that's new that I was interested in. And it makes me feel good again. It makes me feel like a beginner, just like we did when we were starting the podcast. So I know I've been doing that. I've been trying to make some videos on top of that. I think Joey's also trying to do that on his own.
Yep.
And then freelance work to some extent to try and just get, a payday instead of doing advertising because our personal model or the way that we subscribe to this is not to advertise until we build up to a point where we think it's worth our audience's attention to do advertising. We could do freelance work with the skills that we have garnered. And so that's something I'm undertaking to just put some more money in the pocket to reinvest into what we've started. And then just, yeah, definitely building out the vision of what the Debate Without Debate podcast will look like. A rebrand is coming to what this all looks like to give it a bit of a facelift, make it a little more aesthetically pleasing, and situate it in terms of a 2 to 5 year business plan of sorts and other businesses that can come as an offshoot.
Yeah, I also have like a lot of ideas, but I feel like sometimes school kind of takes over my life and it's pretty bad. Like, do you guys have any like specific strategies that you use to balance like your creative work and your obligations?
Uh I think we have to understand that like obligations are just some things that you have to have in your life. Like nobody likes sitting in class and like reading textbooks, and especially people who are creatively driven, like I guess all four of us. It's difficult. It's definitely difficult. But in terms of balance, I think the one thing which has helped me out is sort of scheduling and creating an initiative of the day, saying if I don't get to this, like I get to these basic 3, 4 tasks and I'll be fulfilled. Um, I don't really think that balance is maybe kind of like a bummer, but balance is not really accessible a lot of times. Like there's gonna be periods where you go hyperdrive on school, and there's gonna be periods of time where you're just going all in on podcasting. And that's okay. I don't think that balance is 100% needed all the time. Like sometimes you need to be a specialist for a little bit because that's where you build your skill. Over the summer, Asher and I created podcasts like every single weekend. We recorded probably 3 times per week. We were going all out.
Yep.
And that was our specialty phase. Now, going forward, obviously we have other obligations. Um, but yeah, yeah. We have other obligations, but it's okay because we've built up that skill over that specialty period.
I'll add on my side. I think there's a unique situation that happens once you get into college as well, if you do end up going to college. Where for myself, what I've noticed is just like Joey was saying, I have times where I am only focused on my academic work. Uh, a lot of times that is the thing that consumes my entire life. And when I was younger, before we started this show, which we started this show in my senior year, so right around the time that y'all all are at right now, before that time, I didn't consider myself creative whatsoever. Like, if you said, "Asher, wow, you're so creative," I'd be like, "You're capping." Like, that doesn't describe I would not use that word to describe me. I was very traditional. I did the clubs in school that were, accepted for high acceptances into colleges. I did really well in school. I enjoyed the work that I was doing. I had good relationships with friends, family, teachers. But when I broke out of that, I came into this scenario where I did it at a kind of lucky situation or a lucky point in my life where I was in the second half of my senior year, so I was given the opportunity to double down on the things that I was interested in, and this happened to be one of those things. I also started reading a ton, so there will be periods in your life where you can be incredibly creative. There will be periods where you can't totally be creative. I know over the last month for myself, since I've had an extended break, I've just been pedaling to the metal on creative work because that's what I'm interested in, and that's consumed my life. I know in about 2 weeks when I go back to school, school will probably consume my life for a little bit. So it's about a balance in the grand scheme of things. In the short term, unfortunately, not everything can be balanced. But if you genuinely care about a creative task or activity or a show that you're creating, you're going to come back to it at some point. And the skills that you've developed over that time don't just go away. You might have to dust off a little bit of the aspects that you've forgotten, but you're still going to remember most of it.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of balancing, it's not always possible to keep everything in track. And yeah, for us being also seniors, we have so other things to do. We're running Change Maker Z. We have the interviews, the podcast, tests, SATs. But I think that we need to be optimistic in a point of view. We need to be optimistic in order to make a very general plan to see if we can achieve some of our goals. And if we don't, that's fine.
Definitely.
So, do you think podcasting is like new blogging?
That's a great question. I think so. Podcasting's been around ever since Steve Jobs gave a pretty big speech uh, at an Apple conference before he died. Rest in peace. Um, I think it's been around for 10 plus years now. Blogging obviously has been around for longer, since the beginning of the internet. I don't think it's a new form of blogging because the distinction I've seen in my own experience with writing is there's almost more credence given to podcasters when they're speaking about subjects because you can hear their narrative voice, right? When we're speaking right now, you can hear our voice. Whereas if I'm writing something, you don't know who I am. You haven't seen my face. You haven't heard my voice. You don't know my story per se. And it's a writer's job to instill that in their writing, but not every writer can. But I do think when people are speaking, you can get a better sense of that. So in some ways, it's an elevated form of blogging for some people. For others, it's entirely different because it flows way better or more naturally. But there is crossover. I know a lot of bloggers that I've tapped into in the past are also podcasters. And I have done the reverse of that. I was originally a podcaster and now I'm moving into blogging because I see the benefits of both things. But I wouldn't say that they're one and the same, especially for conversational shows like ours. If you do more narrative based stuff where you're scripting everything out, maybe it's more similar. But even then, sound design's important. How you make the readers feel and the listeners feel can differentiate based off of that fact.
So, what did the podcasting experience teach you? How did both of you guys change throughout this experience?
I think one of the coolest parts about starting any show, even if no one listens, is you get to look back on how you were operating at the beginning. So for Joey and I, when we took a little bit of a break, we looked back at some of our episodes. We would listen back and just kind of sat in awe of our own work. We, not because it's, the best thing you'll ever see per se, but we were sitting back and saying, wow, like, look at how different we were then. We had video. Joey has changed so much in the 2 years since he was a sophomore. I've changed so much in the 2 years since I was a senior in high school. And to see that is kind of beautiful. It's like nothing else other than maybe creating home videos. Um, and it's been really unique to just be able to hear your own voice, listen back, pop. It's the most like out of this world experience to pop some earphones in and be able to listen to yourself from 2 years ago. Like you can look back at your writing, but that's not your specific voice. Going back to the difference between writing and podcasting.
Yeah, and I bet you guys have also like learned a lot from your guests too. So, are there also any key ideas or principles that have stuck with you from your conversations?
Yeah, 100%. I think the conversations in particular that stand out to us are the ones where we get incredible back and forth with our guests, and they're kind of already in line with where we're at in terms of depolarizing issues. So, one in particular really stood out to me. It's a conversation that we had with Clover Hogan, who was a wonderful activist, climate activist out in England, but she's originally from, I believe, Australia. Um, and she was just so on the money with how polarization affects our psychology, how mental health intersects with climate change. So, in a way, in our podcast, we've been learning just like our listeners have, which I think is a really unique form of empathy between the listener and the host themselves. But aside from that, on a business front, I think I've learned way more about marketing, about how to tell a story in a cold email, how to get guests, how to just open a door so you can speak to people you've never spoken to before. What does it look like to go through the process of filing for an LLC in New York State, which is where we're from? All of these back end issues that I would have never learned had I not started this, had we not wanted to create a media company. So there's a ton you can learn, and I'm sure everyone's experience differentiates. I'm sure Joey has different experiences than myself and lessons that he's learned. But it's further cemented me in the fact that polarization is something that we can tackle. It's not something beyond the pale. It's something that has been created, and if people created it, we can undo the fact.
Yeah, I wouldn't really add much to what he was saying, but um, just tapping on one thing. Basically, when we have videos or audio recordings of stuff from 2 years ago, it really is a reflection of where our mindset was during that period of time. And a lot of times, if you're the average Joe or you're the average person, you don't really take that time to journal or to reflect or really analyze where you are in the present moment. And to some extent, the podcast was our way of journaling, of recording our thought process in 2018, 2019, 2020. And there's something beautiful about that. I didn't really expect for it to be like that, but although it turned out as a form of reflectance for us, and I think that's cool for me, especially going back and seeing, 2019 130-pound Joey saying whatever he was saying. I think
Mm,
that's cool. It's almost like a video series of our progress, not just in our journey of depolarizing, but also in our journey of life. So
Yeah, that's amazing. So, do you guys have any feedback for us about this podcasting experience?
Great question. Also, I appreciate the question because most people when they hop out of an interview, they're just like, "All right, great." So applaud the fact that you're trying to improve. Um, I think the one thing that I've realized as an interviewer is my energy determines the energy of interviewers, right? So coming into an interview, I what I've realized for myself is that if I come into an interview and I'm doing a pre-interview just like you guys did, which by the way, that's a great tactic to use just to lighten people up. I really just try and front load with talking quite a bit to them just about how everything is, giving the background of everything, and I try and be as excited about it as possible. I integrate a little bit of the public speaking that I learned as a debater in high school and doing student government. That has worked so well just to make people feel on the same level. So the entire recording is high energy. We're integrating all of the ideas that we have and communicating. So I'd say that. And then, let me see what else. I think other than that, it's just about what we were saying before, just going through the reps, practicing, do it again and again. Clearly, you had questions already prepared, which I think is great because you can flow. But sometimes going off the script is also great. Joey is a major proponent of that. I'm much more scripted in the way I operate and systematized. He is really off the cuff and just really great at throwing spontaneous questions in that break up the sometimes robotic nature of things. That's what I would add, but really just applause to starting and then also to continue to put in the reps over time. I'm sure this will continue to get better.
Adding on to that, um, I can't tell you how to make your masterpiece. The only thing which I can say is like keep on putting in the reps.
Hmm.
You're gonna find your own unique way to become the best version of you and the best version of your podcast and create that. And so the only thing which us as outside podcasters can really say is keep on trying, keep on messing up, keep on having failed recordings sometimes, trying to improvise sometimes, keep on trying to figure out new ways to get to a better end destination. Now, the path to doing that, that's up to you, but just keep on trying. That's really it. You'll get there.
And stay authentic to yourself. Like, don't, if someone messages you and says, wow, like you guys are so robotic, which you're not at all, and never listen to people who say that. We've gotten messages like that. Or they're like, you guys are so, like, you're not how we act, you operate in real life. Just be authentic to you. Like, the more authentic you are in your interview, the better you are.
Yeah. I just hope it gets less awkward over time with more practice.
Yeah. I think the chemistry as well. It's very hard doing interviews like virtually in general, but just making sure you Vasilis and Saloni, you can work together and just like practice with each other to make sure you improve the chemistry. Joey and I do these drills quite a bit where we just sit next to each other and we just talk. I mean, we are brothers, so we just talk a ton, and we're in a lucky situation where we're in the same place. But there were times where we were in different locations and had to continue to do it. Um, so sometimes it'll be off. Sometimes it'll be awkward in the beginning. It definitely is because you're just like trying to make sure everything works. But I think the setup you have right now is the most seamless way of doing so. When we started, we had like, kind of a jacked up audio recording interface, which caused a ton of problems. And then we would get frustrated and all these different things. So over time, it gets better 100%. And just communicating and making sure you both know where you're going is the best part of it all.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate that. I would like to thank you so much for joining us today in this episode.
Of course, it was our pleasure to be here to speak with y'all and to put a face to the names.
This is for today's episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will talk to you soon on our next episode. Bye bye.
We hope you guys enjoyed our conversation. We had such a great time. Make sure you leave us a review. You can also follow us on Instagram at changemaker.c to keep up with all of our new content. We also have a Facebook page called ChangemakerZ, but you'll need to look that one because I honestly don't even know how Facebook works.